one of the highlights was not having a bell schedule. We just kind of rolled with the days as we liked. I think countries that impressed us the most were Jordan. It was a magical place. We had lived in the Middle East, and Jordan was just very different. Whether it was pets or
In what ways?
yeah, the people were really nice, kind, calm. The Dead Sea, you really do float on the Dead Sea. I'd always heard about it, but it is like rubber.
Mhm.
You could do a Superman on the Dead Sea and your whole body is on top. Petra, I've watched enough Indiana Jones in my time to know the treasury and to actually be there and standing there. But then someone told us we had to go to the monastery. So we walked 2.5 hours up the mountain and we found this place that was even more beautiful than the treasury, and I'd never heard about it before in my life. We ended up in New Zealand because we're staying a longer term in Bali, and I found a guy who rented out old VW vans. So I rented out a 1973 Volkswagen Combi, and we just drove around the North Island of New Zealand camping. We just lived in this van for a week and a half. So, like, it's those kind of experiences that I think stick out the most. And then South America, we'd never been. I loved Bolivia. I would tell anybody to visit Bolivia in the Salt Flats. It's just this surreal, surreal scene. Yeah, I've never seen anything like it before.
When I was teaching here at our school division in Moose Jaw, and I was actually part of our local bargaining committee, we bargained to be able to allow teachers to defer part of their salary so that they could take essentially a paid sabbatical in, I think it was you saved for 4 and you got your 5th year off or something like that. I always thought that was a tremendous idea. Never did it though. But there were a couple teachers who did that, thinking about like, what would I do if I had a year of sabbatical? Like, would I just play golf? Would I study? Would I travel? But recently, Craig Cantlie and his wife Charity and their son Owen took a year and traveled in the middle of both of their careers as educators. They traveled the world with very little plan. And of course, I was able to follow their journey through social media, and that was fascinating. And Craig is somebody that I have known for about a decade now. Craig was a principal in West Vancouver School District, and he graciously invited me to speak at 2 of their TEDx events over the past, in a matter of about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And so I'm always grateful for Craig for inviting me that. But as I got to know Craig as a principal, he was all about inquiry, all about innovation, and we've connected over that. After a few years ago, though, he left West Vancouver and he and his wife began teaching abroad in Dubai. He was there for a number of years, then did this year of travel, and now he is a principal in Japan. Besides just being an innovative leader, I definitely wanted to chat with him about what it's like to be a principal in an international school and how are international schools the same and different from his experience in Canada. And I think you'll find his reflections insightful and interesting as he reflects upon his time in West Vancouver and British Columbia, and all that he has gained from that time and continues to learn as a leader in Tokyo. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Craig Cantlie. I'm excited because this is my third guest that's not actually living in Canada,
Mm,
but is Canadian and has a affiliation. So that's why you made it on the show, Craig, is because you have
excellent.
this you have this affiliation. You're a Canadian, true and true. I mean, a Montreal Canadiens fan, which is unfortunate,
Uh,
but hey, you can't have
in
everything,
some
right?
seasons, I would say that, yes, that's true.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So listen, I wanted to, the fascinating thing for people that don't know you, I mean, among many fascinating things, is that you and your wife decided to save up your money and take a year and do travel.
Yes.
What was that like with your son Owen?
Yeah, it was a bold move, I think, but Owen was coming to the end of elementary, which, yeah, at our school in Dubai was grade 5. So then he was gonna head into middle school. Sherry and I have always liked to travel. It's kind of always, been one of the things that we valued highly. And so, yeah, as he was finishing elementary, it was like, "Yep, let's just take the year off and travel." And To be honest with you, we had no real plans. We'd been in Dubai for COVID, hadn't been back to Canada. So we were going back to Canada. I ended up spending the summer in Canada. And then the only plan was Montreal, Iceland. We found that Arcade Fire was playing in Milan in September. So we were going to go for that. We had a friend in Tunisia and then Bali. And then the last part of the trip was going to be Santiago. I wanted to drink coffee in a square in Santiago. And so that's sort of how that's how the year took shape. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. And our son was, Owen was the perfect age for it.
Right.
In retrospect, he was the perfect age for a number of reasons. Cost when you're 11 is much different than when you're 12. And then, as he's a tween, as he likes to say, it's a little bit different hanging out with your parents in that same way.
That's right. What would you point to be a couple of highlights, things that you'll never forget and that immediately come to mind when you think about that year?
Mm, Everywhere was a highlight for different reasons, but I think, one of the things, because we had the plan the way that we had it, we would meet people and they would say, "Oh, you should go here or you should go there." And that's sort of how we made it happen. I think we ended up on a beach outside of Rome. We had booked it for 5 or 6 days and we ended up staying for 3 weeks. And it was just this little town. We knew the people in the stores. We hung out on the beach. There was a monastery or a convent just down the street, and you would have the nuns coming and playing on the beach every day. So it was just like this very interesting world to be looking at. I think one of the highlights was not having a bell schedule, so we just kind of rolled with the days as we liked. And then in terms of countries, I think countries that impressed us the most were Jordan. It was a magical place. We had lived in the Middle East, and Jordan was just very different. Whether it was pets or
In what ways?
yeah, the people were really nice, kind, calm. The Dead Sea, you really do float on the Dead Sea. I'd always heard about it, but it is like rubber.
Mhm.
You could do a Superman on the Dead Sea and your whole body is on top. Petra, I've watched enough Indiana Jones in my time to know the treasury and to actually be there and standing there. But then someone told us we had to go to the monastery. So we walked 2.5 hours up the mountain and we found this place that was even more beautiful than than the treasury, and I'd never heard about it before in my life. We ended up in New Zealand because we're staying a longer term in Bali, and I found a guy who rented out old VW vans. So I rented out a 1973 Volkswagen Combi, and we just drove around to North Island of New Zealand camping. We just lived in this van for a week and a half. So, like, it's those kind of experiences that I think stick out the most. And then South America, we'd never been. I loved Bolivia. I would tell anybody to visit Bolivia in the Salt Flats. It's just this surreal, surreal scene. Yeah, I've never seen anything like it before.
I think on your blog, I was reading about the fact that you're a pretty close family. You just have the one child, and that this experience is something that's going to just remains such a bonding experience anytime you're traveling together in those sort of close quarters or
Mm.
whatever, and living not with a completely structured day and a plan. I think you learn to be pretty flexible and give each other a little bit of space and grace in order to make that work. So that's going to be an amazing gift you gave to your son and to each other in that way too.
Yeah,
So
it was really
yeah,
cool too
he's
because even our son sort of, people asked how we taught him. So I say homeschool, which I would put in real
right.
quotes. But what he kind of started making was the connection. We ended up in Italy for quite some time in Rome, and you can do these tours that are organized for kids. So they took him to the Colosseum, they took him to museums, and they made connections to Percy Jackson. So he was able to take some of the things he learned about in terms of, Iceland mythology, the mythology of the Nordic mythology, and then Roman mythology and Greek mythology. And then we end up in Egypt. So he's making all these connections to all of these different parts of history. It was, it was not done in a purposeful manner, but it was amazing how it
Right.
all just organically came together and his level of interest rose and he did his own delving into it.
I don't know your son, so I don't know exactly where he's been. I'm sure he does well. academically, but you probably didn't see any challenges for him this school year, or other than him maybe missing the travel. He's probably doing quite well where he's at then, I
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, I would say math was probably the one area that, he took a bit of a hit on, but, he'll find that he's got good teachers that are
Figure
helping
that
him
out.
out with that, yeah. And it's funny, the travel part,
Well,
we ended up finding a place. So as we traveled, when we moved to Tokyo, we had a number of things that we wanted. We wanted a traditional Japanese room. We wanted a bit of a bigger space because we'd been so close to each other, and we wanted an outdoor area. So, he's quite happy being home now. Even this December when we said we weren't traveling, he was quite thrilled with that.
your experience as an educator has taken you to a few different places. You said this is your second tenure in Tokyo. Have you had the international while you were in Dubai? I know that. So Dubai and Tokyo. Anywhere else
And I
in
did
British Columbia?
my second year teaching was in London.
One of the things that I try to do in this show is make those connections between, generally speaking, province to province, right? Like, what does education look like in Quebec versus Manitoba versus Alberta versus British Columbia or Northwest Territories? From your perspective, where you sit now and you reflect on your time, specifically in British Columbia, how would you compare the education in British Columbia to the international education world that you've been a part of?
I reference back to BC a lot. I think the BC curriculum and my things have always been inquiry, learning spaces, and community. And I think when you look at inquiry, I've worked at two American schools, so Common Core is the curriculum that we use, and the way that that's shaped, you really have to shape the inquiry around that. Whereas in BC, the curriculum is designed for that type of learning to happen. I think, I very much respect and appreciate BC education, appreciate how I was trained in BC, how I was a leader in BC, and the work you could do around that. I think because of the continuity that the province, the ministry provides, and then the school districts. I think I've seen in international schools, you have people coming from all these different places with different trainings, with different expectations that were put on them in the different places that they've lived. And so trying to bring people together in terms of a common understanding and towards a common vision is a lot of work that you have to do in
Right.
onboarding when you become a new administrator in terms of what it looks like. I've really learned you have to listen to where people have come from before you can take them somewhere, because I think when I first started is I just assumed everyone had the same sort of experience that we had in BC, but they don't. But I think,
Right.
yeah, continuity of practice, district to district, school to school in BC, in American and international schools, which are all very different as well. You have to figure out what those
Right.
practices are, what people have brought to the table already. So, yeah. So, yeah, I've referenced a lot. I think they
So,
just came out with the reporting standards. So I've
yeah,
started looking at that. And so what can we learn from what BC's created in terms of our own school as well?
I think about that leadership challenge that you allude to is, like you said, you're teaching your principal in British Columbia. Well, the majority of your teachers probably went to teacher colleges in British Columbia, maybe not necessarily,
Mhm.
but certainly the language, the culture, the context is similar. And so you can skip a few stages, if you will, in terms of how are we going to think, because there's a common framework, common language. So here in an international school, that's not the case. And yet there seems to be a potential opportunity with that diversity, with those varying perspectives. So how do you as a leader not just try to bring people
Mm.
together, which is a big part of it, but also tap into that diversity to find out how somebody who is educated in a completely different country or culture can bring the best of that to your school and your students?
Dubai is probably the best example of that. I think, you're using an American curriculum, so you have that as your central focus and the work to build around. We did a lot of sharing. We would do a lot of collaborative work where it wasn't, this is generally the framework of what we're going to do. Now let's bring our own experiences into what that looks like. And we did a lot of shaping. So, for me as a principal, I come in with the general framework of where we want to go. Like, this is what the vision looks like. These are the pieces that I think we need to have so we can have continuity and commonality amongst each other. But this is the framework. So let's build it together. So what does this look like based on your experiences? And so we used to have a lot of, dialogue and debate about how we would put this together to sort of match both the expectations we needed for, our accreditation, but also from the experiences that we had. I had one experience, we did a lot of teacher evaluations in Dubai. And one of the experiences that really kind of stuck with me is I had a teacher from the States who got quite emotional during her evaluation because she was so used to it being very stressful. It was very stressful. There was a lot of things that they had to have in place. Things had to be done a certain way. And, as I'm doing the evaluation, she was waiting for a shoe to drop or waiting for something to happen, and it never happened. But I had never understood that that's sometimes how people had, evaluations or appraisals of their performance. But within what she had experienced before, she was hoping for some of that. So then I had to adjust myself to sort of match what her past experiences were with what I thought was best practice in terms of where we were as a school.
And I was going to ask you about a leadership challenge, but I think you just maybe shared one. But when you look back at your career, and I don't care if you want to pull from your time in Vancouver or Dubai or London or wherever, what are you sort of most proud of in the work that you've done over your career? Because again,
I've always had like you know, uh, people ask why you became an administrator, and I became an administrator because I loved what I did in my classroom, and it felt like the classroom was a microcosm of a school. So I wanted to take that and apply it to a school. And I think my philosophy, my vision for what future focused learning looks like, it's around inquiry, it's around learning spaces that look different from when I went to school, and it's around community and school identity, school spirit, whatever you want to call it. So I think I look back on West Van as probably still one of the highlights because I think when I was in Dubai, we did a lot of great work, but then COVID is sort of the veil under which some of that work happened. So if I go back to Caulfield in West Van, I think the fact that we were able to bring in an educational consultant and really work on inquiry as a school and people came together around what that would look like and we collaboratively built it out. We looked at spaces because if you're going to change that mindset for learning, I always feel like you got to change that space for that mindset to grow. And so we took a committee of teachers and parents, and we went to a number of different companies. We went to an architectural firm, we went to Hootsuite, we went to SAP just to see what the world of work looked like. Because I think when we've been in schools for so long, that's what we think the world looks like. But when you go out and see what the world looks like in the 21st century, it looks very different. And the reason it's very different is because the skills, of collaboration,
right.
communication, creativity are all what's valued. So how do they create that? So, we took a number of staff to those places and we took teacher ideas and we put them into place and built the
Yeah.
school around that. And then I think, in terms of the community piece, it was what we did with the Squamish Nation around, kind of really bringing in the indigenous learning to the school and really became the frame for who we were as the Bear. So I think I think that's some of my proudest work because that was my first work as a principal, which can be very challenging. But I've also tried to take the lessons of what I learned there and applied it into the next context that I've gone into.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. I remember when you were taking your staff to some of these other places outside of education to bring that in. And it was at the same time that you launched TEDx West
Mm.
Van for, I don't know how many years is that? 7 years did you do
Yeah, we
that?
did it 13 to 19.
So we'll say
Yeah.
7. So when you look back at that time, and I had the privilege of actually speaking twice at 2 different of those events, and I was very, very grateful for that opportunity, and always was very impressed with the lineup that you would put together. What did you learn from that experience, especially in terms of the people that you brought in? Because that was part of
Mm,
it, right? Is like we want to learn from people who don't think like us or don't experience this life in the same
mm.
way.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the themes of what we did for TEDx, and it was the different themes were rethinking education, the forest through the trees, beyond the classroom, beyond the classroom walls, and then imagine. And I think about how those really were reflected in the work that I was doing in a school and how I was thinking as a leader. I think one takeaway from that was we really, as a team, wanted to create an event for teachers that made them feel like professionals. I think for too long, what happens many times is professional learning takes place in a classroom or a gym or something like that. And so for us, it was, education's a really important, we're in a really important profession and people need to feel that value and that importance. And so that was one thing we really tried to create. But I think what I liked most out of all of that was the sharing that people wanted to do. There was a lot of great things that were happening in schools and in classrooms. And I think what I love the most about it, and we talked about this at the beginning, was that power of social media was people are presenting about really interesting things that they were doing, and people were able to connect with those people, during and after. And we saw a lot of like it
Right.
germinate into different classrooms and different schools. And even now I still hear feedback sometimes from people on how a speaker or an event sort of spoke to them. We invited Will Richardson up, which in TEDx, we didn't pay anybody to come. We would give them a night in a hotel, but they had to do it because they wanted to. And I had Will Richardson come, who was a big name, and his talk is a talk that I still show at schools because I think it was really impactful in terms of what we're doing in terms of education and why we're doing it. Kath Murdoch came up from Australia and talked about the power of inquiry. And again, like I've continued to work with her, because of the work that she does in schools around the world. So I think it's been great. It's the people like you and I are connected. It had it not been for Twitter, I probably wouldn't know you. I probably wouldn't have invited you. And we continued to have this relationship and like even your whole, focus on joy as something it's still always impacted me in terms of as a leader when I go into these new schools, making sure there is that element of joy, both for me as a leader, but also for teachers putting it into the classroom.
Yeah, there's so many great memories. The one I just thought of though that I hadn't for a while was when Gary Kern took my keys from my rental
That's
car.
right.
I
Oh, I
remember that
forgot that you had to get out.
where
You
I didn't have time to get to the airport because my flight was leaving, so I still it's one of my proudest travel moments that I think my flight was leaving at 4 o'clock, and I left West Vancouver at 3:05, I think, what time he got, and I made my flight. I dropped off my rental car and made my
yeah.
flight. But yeah, I was just Gary Kern took my
I
keys.
we had you near the beginning, so I think I was trying to host it while trying to find Glory
Oh,
to
yeah.
get your keys.
Well, yeah, you were. We were on the phone because we didn't know who took them because I dropped them in the presenter bag and he took my bag because I think they were all the same. So he just grabbed a bag. Happened to be the ones that I foolishly put my rental car keys in. But anyway, lots of that was a good memory. And I think too about when Martha and I spoke too. That was the same one where you had Joey,
Me
who we met at an Ignite session that I had done where Joey is a comedian that had come on and talked about his own struggles with some mental health issues, and you were struck by that and he came up. That was a powerful. I still know of where Joey is these days. I think he's in France or
yeah,
something like that, but just that opportunity to introduce people, not only for him but for an audience to see different people from all kinds of walks of life. I think that was a fabulous experience, and I think you deserve kudos, you and your team, for putting all those great events together. It was
yeah,
powerful.
thanks. Yeah, I think, I get as we've been talking, I think a couple of other things are those connections, right? We always had an educator, we always had a teacher, we always had a leader, we always had someone from outside of school, we always had a student, and we tried to always have a parent. So you had all the different voices of education
Yeah,
within that space. And I think it really kind of taught me the power of asking. Like if you ask, for the most part, everyone came. Anybody I asked, they tried to make it happen.
right.
I remember Alan November. He was trying to figure out his schedule, but he was coming, and so
Yeah,
yeah, I think it really taught me the power of like the power of invitation maybe is better than the power of asking. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. So you talked a little bit about your current role as principal with two vice principals. You're trying to help them in terms of really taking a principalship role. But when you think about giving advice to leaders, I ask everybody this question, and I'm always curious the answer. If you were giving advice to a young 25-year-old, just brand new to teaching, who's thinking, I might want to do your job someday, or I'd like to get involved in leadership, what advice would you give them right now to get them started on that journey?
It's an interesting question because I've had a number of people over the years ask me, what leadership experience do you have? And I say, well, why do you want to be a leader? And it's because I think my time in the classroom is done. Like I want to move out of the classroom. And I always think to myself, that's not the reason. You have to love the classroom and then go into an administrative experience. Like I still love like when I left, I loved the classroom. Like that's the space where you're impacting kids' lives every single day. Whether you know it or not, you're having an impact on them. So I think, you know, go into admin with a love for teaching and for the classroom. And now you want to take what you've created and have a bigger impact on it. And so I think, I tell a lot of people like, what is it that you're interested in? And follow that within a school or a district or a community in terms of leadership. So for example, we interviewed for an assistant principal and I had a gentleman who was a music teacher, a band teacher. And I kind of talked to him about like, he didn't get the job, but I gave him some feedback. I'm like, you're a music teacher. Like you've run these big concerts. You know how to organize. So take that and continue to grow with it. And when you go into a leadership interview, talk about it. As a music teacher, you're doing personalized learning all the time. That everyone has a different instrument. So how are you helping them get to be
Right.
the best that they are at each of those instruments? So again, what kind of leadership can you present around that? And what skills as a music teacher could you then apply to into a leadership role? So I think if you're a young teacher coming out, take advantage of the different leadership aspects of your school. Lead in the practice that you're doing and help others, understand what you're doing in your classroom and try to influence them. I think, connecting in with other people and creating your own community is a huge piece. But yeah, I think not only being a great teacher, but also helping your colleagues to advance their practice and to advance what they're doing in a school probably be my advice. And not to rush into it.
That's good advice.
If you're 25, you got
Yeah.
years to be a leader,
Right.
enjoy the kids for as long as you want, and then
Yeah.
and then move into that leadership role.
Yeah.
God, I feel
That's
like it's
good
like
advice.
old man advice now. I feel like I've gotten to that point where it's like, oh, here's the old man wisdom.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I think you're also at a point where people are asking you for it. So you're not spewing unsolicited advice. It's people that want to know, how do I do this? How do I get to do what you do? And it's one of the things I know that you mentioned, how do you bring joy in, the work that I do is helping leaders live out what that means. Cause I believe right now we're in a crisis of
Mm,
leadership. And I have said this over and over. We do not need good leaders anymore. We need great leaders, because I think we got away with good leaders for a long time. When think back in my own career, first started teaching, I didn't need they just left me
right.
alone, and the expectations were lower. Some of the challenges weren't as strong, and so I didn't need somebody. But I think now teachers, with all of the added challenges that they're facing, with the expectations, with a lot of kids with a lot more learning challenges and emotional challenges, they need great leaders to support them.
Mm,
And one of the things I remember thinking vividly as a young teacher was there were principals, and most of the principals I looked at said, I think I'd like to do their job one day. Like they look like they're having fun.
mm,
They look like they're enjoying their work. So, how do you, as a principal, visibly show people, I love my job? I really like doing what I'm doing. And again, every personality is different. So, you're not going to all do it in the same
yeah.
way, but in some way, showing those potential leaders that you might want to do my job one day.
Mm,
How do I get that young teacher to think, hey, I think I'd like her
yeah.
job? She looks like she's just killing it, crushing it every day. And I think we all get in that space where we're just in our own world and we don't realize the vibe we may or may not be giving off to people, even though maybe intentionally, because you can be really enjoying your work and look sometimes like you're not, but you say, no, no, I'm just really intense about it. So how we model leadership is really, I think,
Mm.
critical,
I think one
without saying a word, even just what we do every
Yeah,
day.
yeah. I think one of the things I've worked on with, my team even this year is I like to think of things in 3-year plans. Like I if I'm wanting to be a leader, I think about the bigger picture. Like don't get caught in the weeds. If you get caught in the weeds, this job is not a lot of fun. But if you can keep the big picture in
Yeah.
mind and you're gonna go this way, but you can go that way, you're gonna come back. But if you think of where you want to be in 3 years generally, then you're gonna make your plan all the way along. And so I think, I think for new leaders, that's sort of my biggest piece of advice. I think 3 years is a perfect amount of time to think, and obviously that adjusts. And, when I start new schools, it ends up probably being a 4-year plan as I do 1 year of listening sort of idea before putting anything into place. But I think if you can see the forest through the trees, this job is a lot more enjoyable.
I'll bet. Yes, for sure. So one of the things I'm adding to the 2024 season of this show is asking people to name somebody in education that you're grateful for, and might be a coworker or a mentor, or an unsung
Mm.
hero. But I'd like it to be somebody who could listen to this and hear their name mentioned and feel good about, hey, Craig mentioned me and that makes me feel good. So I don't know who that is for you. So just somebody that you're grateful for in the world of education.
I was talking to Chris the other day. So Chris Kennedy, superintendent of West Bend School District. He left a huge imprint on me. I think the culture of yes, the opportunities and the freedom he provided me as a leader. I think, he in our conversation, he mentioned the word entrepreneurial. I can be quite I think I can be an entrepreneurial sort of leader in terms of, trying to build out a school. And he provided me with that freedom to do that. I think it's really important. I think in a school district like West Van, the policies were there, the expectations were there, but I think the big idea of the pillars, that was something you could shoot towards. The opportunity around technology, working with investing in people, bringing in people like you to work with us as a school and as a district. And I think, I've always been grateful to the opportunity he provided me. And then, that fostering of, my enthusiasm and interests and skills for the benefit of the schools and the students. I also think, if can I add a couple other people? Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Sure, sure, sure,
Yeah, I
sure.
think just in terms of consultants, like I've worked with Lee Crockett in terms of inquiring. I worked with him at Caulfield. Again, somebody who saw an opportunity to try something in a school, and that again that was in partnership with Chris to make that happen. And we did. We really brought inquiry to the school. And Kath Murdoch has always kind of influenced my thinking since I met her in Tokyo, over a decade ago now.
I know for sure Chris will listen to
Yeah.
this. Chris, you're listening, right? You heard that. You got your name on there. I think that'll be good. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, those that great call outs there. So wrapping up here, what are you reading these days that's interesting?
Yeah. Yeah, and, to be honest with you, not much. Kind of like I've been enjoying the articles on Twitter and LinkedIn and that sort of thing. I've attempted audiobooks and not so good
Mm-hmm.
with those. I got Adam Grant's Hidden Potential, and it's a great book, but I think I'm better at reading it. And then The Art of Gathering, I also started that, but I just don't listen to them in the same way.
It's a good one.
But I've been
Yeah.
listening to a lot of podcasts. I love I love
Okay, give me
I
a
love
couple.
Smartless. I just love
Yeah.
the banter of those
Yeah, it's
guys.
good.
I r
Did you see the documentary
I
they
have
did?
not seen the documentary, no, but I
Yeah,
listened to the interview. Is it
finished
good?
it. I finished it over Christmas.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
yeah,
very good. Very good.
yeah.
Yeah.
I listen to Armchair Experts with Dax Shepard. He's
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
he
Dax
had
up.
his recent ones with Adam Grant and Trevor Noah are excellent. I would tell anybody to listen to those ones. I like, he's kind of along the lines of Smartless, but his podcasts are much longer, and he really kind of dives into.
He's a little more serious. Like he tends to he can get into some pretty interesting ideas. So he's a bit more of a deeper dive than the Spartless
Yeah.
guys. And like you said, just because of long form too, he's not afraid to get into the weeds, which can be really interesting
Yeah.
in a lot of
Yeah.
topics.
And then my other one's 32 Thoughts. American Friedman, hockey. It's hockey talk. Living in Tokyo, I still need to
Oh,
get
okay.
my fix of hockey. So
So do you actually try to stay like what is your routine now to follow
well,
sports?
so when I lived in Dubai, I could get up in the morning, I could eat my cereal and watch hockey. It's not quite the same, so I'm watching the highlights. Follow the scores, try to
Okay.
watch a Canadians game every chance I get, and 32 Thoughts comes out on a
Yeah.
weekly basis, so I give that a listen as well.
Yeah, it's a little different. What about is so mindless binge watching? Anything in the streaming field that you like?
Slow Horses, just finished the season of Slow Horses.
Okay.
That's a great one. Maybe they finished a little while ago, but I love Succession and I loved Billions. Those were 2 really good shows.
So Billions I finished, watched it all. Somebody said, "Well, if you like Billions, you'll like Succession." And I started Succession, and for some reason, here's the analogy that I'll give. You know, when you grab a drink and you think it's one thing and you put it in your mouth and your brain says it's one thing, but then it takes a second for it's like, oh, that's all. And there's a bit of that's what happened with me because I didn't get the dark humor at first. And I'm watching this and I was thinking, am I supposed to be laughing here? Because Billions, of course, there's none
Yeah.
of that, obviously. And so I know I'm gonna have to go back and watch it, but I got off to a bad start with it, and because I was also watching Billions at the same time, I was like, "Nah, I'm just gonna stick with Billions."
Yeah.
So anyway, so you finished
Finished
Succession though?
Succession, yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, it was
all right.
excellent.
I'll give it
It's funny though when you binge these things because, as you go, it's a lot of repetitiveness, right? No, to the pattern of it. So, yeah,
That's
for
right.
Succession, I would watch like a season and then take a little bit of break and then finish it. But yeah, you'll enjoy it.
Oh yeah, I got
Yeah.
that one. So listen, we talked about travel already. So you've been in Tokyo now, and I guess you were there before. But listen, Tokyo would be an amazing place for anybody to visit. So if they're coming, what's some place that they might not think about? Might be, third page on a Google search of things to do in Tokyo that you think, hey, you should check this out. This is a really cool place, experience, or other.
Ooh, that's a great question. You know, I don't know if it would be on page 3, it might be on page 2, but Kamakura, which is just past Yokohama. It's basically this beach town, but it has this massive Buddha and temples all around it. It's a beautiful scenic place. You got the water there. It feels very zen, very relaxing, but I think it's to me, even when we came back, that was one of the first places we went to kind of feel like we were back in Japan. Tokyo's super busy. You got to go to Shibuya Crossing. You got to have that experience, but you know, I think there's just a lot of temples. There's a lot of famous temples, but there's a lot of places you could just go and see and feel the sense of Japan. And one of the things we kind of live, my school is right in the middle of Tokyo. Our house is a little bit further out, but, even walking the neighborhood and just seeing the little nuances of what Japanese culture looks like Charity every morning goes out and she rakes the leaves in front of our house. And she's won the appreciation of all our older neighbors because that's what you do for the community on New Year's, the day before. So one of the things before New Year's is everyone cleans their house to start the new year. That's what everybody's doing. People are power washing. So we went out and we cleaned the street. We have this gate grate with all these leaves underneath. And man, so many people came by and said, thank you to us for doing this for the neighborhood. So I think, you can go to
Interesting.
all the sites in Japan, but I think just stopping and watching the nuances of Tokyo in Japan is probably one of the biggest things I would suggest for people to do.
Very cool. Well, I hope to get there one day and do such things. So anyway, Craig, this was fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time. Always great to hear from you and loved your perspective. So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks for inviting me on.